Every bride knows the dress should be white. It feels obvious, like flowers, rings, a first dance, not learned, not explained, just there, as if it has always been that way. But the white wedding dress has no centuries. It has a year, 1840, and a woman who chose it for reasons that had very little to do with tradition and quite a lot to do with lace. Part 1. Before white. For most of history, a bride wore what she already owned. In ancient Rome, that meant a white woolen tunic, saffron shoes, and a flame-colored veil. Colors tied to fire, not to innocence. In medieval Europe, the dress was about status. Red for fertility, blue for the Virgin Mary, gold and silver if your family could afford to be noticed. A bride in black raised no eyebrows. A bride in brown even less. The dress wasn't symbolic. It was practical. It was expected to be worn again. To church, to feasts, to everything else. No one bought a garment meant for a single day. That idea simply didn't exist. And white, it meant nothing. In some places, it meant mourning. Part 2, February 10th, 1840. Victoria was 20 years old, deeply in love, and about to do something unexpected. She chose a white dress. Royal brides before her wore silver, gold, heavy fabrics designed to signal power. Victoria refused all of it. No crimson robes, no crown, no ermine. She wanted to enter the chapel as a bride, not as a monarch. But there was another reason. Britain's handmade lace industry was collapsing. Machine production was faster, cheaper, relentless. Artisans in Devon were losing their livelihoods. Victoria commissioned a gown trimmed with Honiton lace, handmade, English, and expensive. White satin wasn't symbolic. It was practical. It showed the lace. So the most influential wedding dress in modern history was part love story and part economic intervention. The public saw only the love story, which is usually how these things begin. Part 3. The rewriting. The image spread quickly. Newspapers printed illustrations of the dress across Europe and America. Fashion plates copied it. Cards, prints, sheet music all showed brides in white. Within a few years, it moved from unusual to fashionable, and then it became something else. In 1849, Godey's Ladies' Book, the most widely read women's magazine in America, made a claim. White, it said, had always been the traditional bridal color, a symbol of purity and innocence. This was not a reinterpretation, it was an invention. White had not been the standard before Victoria. The magazine simply wrote it into history, confidently enough that no one questioned it. And once the meaning existed, it stayed. Not because it was true, because it sounded right, like something that had always been there. And after a while, no one really thought to question it. Part 4. The rule. Even then, white wasn't immediate. For most women, it was still out of reach. A white dress was expensive, difficult to maintain, easy to ruin. Wearing one meant you could afford not to wear it again. For decades, it remained a luxury. Most brides continued wearing color well into the 20th century. During the Depression, buying a dress for a single day was unthinkable. War brides married in borrowed clothes, uniforms, whatever was available. The shift came after 1945. Post-war prosperity changed what was possible. Bridal magazines expanded. The wedding became an industry. And then came the images. Hollywood, photographs. In 1956, Grace Kelly's wedding dress appeared everywhere. Designed not just to be worn, but to be seen. By mid-century, white was no longer a preference. It was the default. The dress you were shown first. The dress people expected to see. The dress that made every other choice feel like something you had to explain. Somewhere between Victoria and the 1950s, a choice hardened into a rule, and the rule forgot it had ever been a choice. Part 5. The veil returns. Victoria herself never treated the dress as sacred. She wore the lace again. To christenings, to family weddings. She lent her veil to her daughter. For her, it wasn't a symbol, it was a memory. and then Albert died. In 1861, Victoria entered mourning and stayed there for the rest of her life. 40 years in black. Black silk, black crepe, black everything. She became the most famous widow in the world. But near the end, she left instructions. Detailed, private. She asked for a white funeral, white horses, white fabric, and her wedding veil placed over her face. The woman who began the white wedding dress ended her life by returning to it. Not as tradition, not as symbolism, just as the closest thing to the happiest day she had known. The white wedding dress was never ancient. It began on a single morning in 1840, with a young queen, a struggling lace industry, and a decision that was quietly practical. Everything that followed, the symbolism, the expectations, the meaning, came later, layer by layer, built on top of a choice that was never meant to carry any of it. It just showed the lace. And now it feels like it was always meant to be.